So we just happened to be in Paris, France. We were looking for some historical sites having to do with our upcoming documentary, and we ended up running smack dab in the middle of these riots and protests of the Gilets Jaunes in Paris that have been ongoing for well over a month.
Revolution.
I've never been to Paris before. This was the first time I had ever been there. The first full day of being there. And we heard that the subways were closed and all the major tourist attractions were closed and everybody was warning us away from the city center. So we thought, well, we'll rent some of those little scooters that they have on the street corners that you can just pick up and drop off wherever you want. And we'll just go around everything to get the locations we needed to film. And so that didn't end up happening. What ended up happening was we rode straight into a riot/protest on a scooter.
On vacation or for work?
Yeah, we had heard that they were closing down, all the major tourist sites from the Eiffel Tower to the Palace of Versailles, but we weren't really going to those places, so we thought we would have a chance to sort of go around everything, but instead we just got caught up in the middle of it, really.
It was the weirdest thing. It was like riding up on a movie set, because they closed down not just all the tourist attractions, but they closed down all of the businesses in the city center too.
I just think it's weird how everything's closed in the middle of a Saturday. Everything's
all the stores are closed. All up and down the street. Everybody's turning the lights off. People are in here freaking out. There's people in here that work here. They turned all the lights off.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to come see Paris.
It's a really weird thing for a Saturday afternoon to arrive in a huge city like Paris and have everything be like a ghost town, and just have hundreds of people in yellow vests hanging out on street corners and marching around.
It was totally surreal, and we were just out of place.
I think by closing down all the businesses like that, because I've never seen them do that for protests or anything here in America. They'll put up barricades and stuff, guardrails, but they don't usually shut down everything.
We don't have any kind of face protection, do we?
I know that.
Cops are marching them back. They're marching them back. I think we turned down the wrong street, dude.
Google said this was the way.
Thanks, Google.
By shutting everything down.
Some areas of central Paris looked like a ghost town this morning, with streets deserted.
Pretty much everything. All they did was just leave it open for more people protesting, because at that point there's nothing else to do. Everything's closed. So there's nothing, it's a Saturday, most people aren't at work anyway, but the people that would have been, they're not, because everything's closed. It's just really, it's like a backwards way of them promoting this protest, really.
tear gas. Smoking out the alley.
Seemed to be almost the only thing anyone was talking about anyway. But yeah, it was just weirdly, eerily shut down.
Everything we heard driving up on this before we got there was all about how this is the next French Revolution. This is the redo of the 1968 protest. This is going to be so bad. It's going to be the worst thing ever. But what we ended up seeing mostly was just a lot of angry people walking around. And then riot cops shooting tear gas at them.
Nobody's even doing anything. Why are they tear gassing people when no one's actually doing anything? Directions. They're gonna shoot it over here, man. Oh shit!
Did you see that by chance? Probably better you didn't. Yeah.
What, are they just retaking the street? They don't want people in this street? They're just going to push everyone back?
Let's get back.
This is insane, man.
Yeah, let's see if Luke got back.
I ran before it got me. It didn't get me.
Right. Okay. And the stage was very much set for that police confrontation. They really wanted to put the protesters in their place and have a show of force. And they had published in the papers, I think they had as many as 90,000 cops and military throughout the country. There's at least 10,000 in the city, and everywhere they had shields and helmets and a lot of use of tear gas, which we saw firsthand.
What's happening?
Everyone's running. They threw something in the street.
And really not a lot of violence from the crowd, although I did see a few provocateurs in the crowd who had masks and they were covering their faces. You know, the vast majority of protesters were just themselves wearing the yellow vest that everyone wears, and they were just there. But a small handful of people were wearing masks, had their face covered.
Perfect.
was who you saw interacting with police, kicking windows, throwing down motorcycles. And setting cars on fire. There was a lot of cars set on fire.
There was a lot of cars set on fire, but it didn't make a lot of sense because there were so many cops everywhere, and there was a helicopter overhead that was monitoring the crowd from above and radioing down. And somehow these cars would get set on fire, and they were allowed to burn for a really, really long time with nobody doing anything about it, which made no sense because as soon as a group of protesters got to a street corner and amassed enough of them, the cops immediately would run down that way and surround that area and start shooting at them, trying to break them up. So I mean, it was full-on military-style police force out in the streets, and yet somehow these cars, not only, I mean, were they obviously being set on fire, but they were allowed to burn for just a really long time.
I think we should get out of here. I think we should go. Go, come on.
Because yeah, on every corner the police were always there waiting for the crowd, and
I think we should go.
they would charge at them and challenge them with the tear gas just for standing there and doing nothing. But they wouldn't do anything to stop the cars being set on fire, which we saw again and again at corner after corner. And it seemed like they would wait for the battery to explode and make an even bigger fire, send that black smoke down the street that we saw so many times. And then eventually the fire truck would show up and put out the fire.
Which is ridiculous because they knew exactly where it was and what was going on. Like I said, there was a helicopter overhead, so they could pretty much see everything that was going on from a bird's eye view. Overall, it really seemed like they were promoting this more than trying to shut it down.
And I think ultimately what we could figure out about what was it about and why people were there, people are really angry because they're being pushed to their limits. They can't afford the cost of living. They're angry about the fuel tax.
I think since the crisis, the economic crisis, people are more poor because every price increase as energy. Yeah. And it's very difficult for us today because a lot of people can't finish their month. French are paid every month. So we are one wage for 1 month. And at the 20th of the month, some people can't eat. Yeah. So,
it takes on a very familiar pattern with other protests we've seen, such as the 1999 WTO protest in Seattle, where the protests are diminished and delegitimized by rioters and anarchists who break private property and give a pretext for the police reaction, for the police clampdown against the people. And in particular, there's the optics and the image of broken glass, spray-painted slogans, destroyed property, burning cars, and things like this that really give people a distaste for the dissent and opposition, and ultimately sort of give credence to the establishment and the ruling entities. And it really seems like the powers that be have used the images and the optics of the destruction in their favor. I mean, just think about the power it gives them to have a reason to crack down.
None of the protesters, the legitimate protesters down here, want any of this kind of action.
They can't just say these are nonviolent protesters, there's no reason for the police response. They can cut right to the images of the worst of it and give a direct reason for cracking down and even for using force against people in the streets.
More clashes with other protesters telling them to stop because they're giving everyone a bad name.
These are protests that have shaken France.
In Paris, violent clashes erupted between police and protesters for the third straight weekend.
Once again, we witnessed scenes of chaos, destruction, and anger here on the streets of Paris.
Paris police are bracing for more violent protests this weekend.
French authorities are still removing burned-out cars, cleaning up broken glass, and scouring graffiti from buildings on the famed Champs-Élysées Avenue and other Paris landmarks that were trashed by protesters over the weekend.
Some protesters set cars and barricades on fire and vandalized luxury stores.
The French capital suffered the worst unrest for more than a decade, with homes burnt, shops looted and clashes with police. Here, rioters placed fireworks inside a police car.
Right now, French officials are considering a state of emergency to prevent more deadly unrest.
It looks like Europe is unraveling.
It is.
It looks like Europe is unraveling.
Most French people say they support the cause of the protesters, lower taxes and better services, but not the violence.
It's the same pattern, the same visuals, the same images that sort of sell it as a riot rather than just a protest of angry people. And it had the exact same pattern. So from our viewpoint, it really seemed like a largely legitimate protest that was being kind of spun and absorbed and taken over by the optics and the visuals that they really wanted to sell in the wider public.
I did some looking into it, and the lady that supposedly started this whole thing is a 51-year-old musician and hypnotherapist, but she has long since stopped with this because she received a bunch of death threats and got out of the way, and now you have self-appointed people who are coming in and saying, I'm the leader of the whole protest now. Like this Terry Paul Vallette guy, he is on every news station. He's being interviewed everywhere. They mention him all of the time. And I looked into him just a little bit. He's somebody who, before this, he was an actor and he was an artist and a comedian, and he was in films and he was in TV shows. He comes from a prominent family. He apparently worked for UNESCO at some point, or he has done work in affiliation with UNESCO. All of a sudden, last year, he starts a national equality movement, and then he's in every march, he's in every protest. If they're gonna go take pictures of hundreds of protesters, they find him in the crowd and take a picture of him holding up a sign. And so all of a sudden, this guy is now the new leader of the movement, and he's saying, well, it's not even about the tax anymore. It's about everything now. We're gonna make this even bigger. It's gonna be about something else. This was just the spark. We're just getting started. This is really the next civil war. And I'm just saying, he looks about as phony as... It's just, you can tell he's got that signature pattern, just like they always do.
It looks like the telltale same old foundation funded and steered kind of thing where they take something over. And they're really pushing the idea and selling it. We heard it in the streets that this is a war. Somebody was handing out flyers with guillotines on it, and they're kind of pushing that idea. But really, the truth is it's in the larger context of what's happening on a European and global scale, because they're really trying to modernize society to the point where everything is digital, everything is on the grid, everything is controlled. And that's what we found in the background of this. I think it's one of the major keys that no one has really picked up on or focused on, is that France is trying to assimilate its economy in the same model as the report that we did on Estonia.
France has already said they're going to reach the Estonian level of e-governance by 2022.
They're trying to go digital. They're trying to integrate everything into the larger regional and global system that has been slowly being built over the last several decades, half century and century. And they're reaching a crucial point where Macron and the other technocrats are trying to force it through, and ordinary people, working people, are reaching their limit and they're not having it. They're upset about it, and they're going to give those people, a little token a little chance to steam valve to let out their anger, and then they're going to bring them back in a few months and within a couple years, because they have a relatively short deadline for making this happen in France. And so they're seeing these flashpoints, and they're dealing with that through the left-right paradigm, the Hegelian dialectic.
The learned helplessness. And
they're getting, you know, a very socialized country to beg for more control ultimately, because they're so vulnerable financially and economically.
Well, here's what you have. You have this Macron guy. Is it Macron or Macron?
I've been going with Macron. I don't know. I'm not an expert.
Macron. I've heard it pronounced many ways.
Macaroni. It's like macaroni.
Don't. That's not. Look.
I'm half French.
He's a Rothschild banker, and just looking at it from an outsider's perspective, it looks to me like one of the main reasons this guy was brought in was to implement this system. Last year, the Prime Minister of France, Edouard Philippe, his very first official trip as Prime Minister was to visit Estonia, which you guys, if you follow this channel, you remember we mentioned a lot about during the Bilderberg meetings this year. He visited Estonia. That was the first thing he did, and announced that France is committed to digitally transforming the country by 2022. That just so happens to be the year Macron's headed out, unless he gets put back in. So within 5 years, starting 2017, they said, we're going to put in this Estonia-like digital centralization of everyone's data, everyone's information. And what it is they give each citizen this digital identity card. It's a national ID smart card with an electronic chip in it that centralizes everybody's data into one centralized place. And it's used for all kinds of things, from electronic voting and healthcare to logging into the person's bank accounts and things like that. So they can put it all in one place and verify every citizen, both digitally and in the real world. And this is really where they're trying to move the entire world.
And as I was briefing myself and learning about Estonia, this really cool, tiny country, you can fill out your tax return in Estonia online in 5 minutes. That should be a worthy aspiration for a great nation. The government should be in the cloud.
And this situation right here is going to help probably be a catalyst for pushing that towards that eventuality, because they can say, well, see how everybody was in this particular situation. We really need to get this system implemented right away. And at that point, it'll be a lot easier to tax or do anything you want to do, because everyone's information is going to be all centralized in one place.
Absolutely, and all the graffiti in the streets and slogans on individual protesters' jackets, a lot of the anger was levied against Macron, who again was groomed in the schools that you get into if you're going to be a future leader of France and a politician.
Macron is the president of the rich.
He's the president of the rich.
He's the president of the rich.
But he went into the banking industry working for the Rothschilds directly, and really he won his election kind of suspiciously. There was a lot of support for Le Pen. There's a lot of supporters on the other side for the socialists, and instead the country got an autocratic leader who pretty much declared he was going to decree autocratically and kind of lord over everyone.
He said he was going to be like Jupiter.
He did. And
at the time he was a very young man, Macron was trained and groomed and mentored by an older elite class. And now his true colors are revealing themselves as he just announced that he desires to reign as a Jupiterian president, a remote, dignified figure like the Roman god of gods. He threatened to overrule lawmakers with a referendum if they try to frustrate the reforms that he wishes to impose on the legislature.
He really pissed a lot of people off, and they're all, you know, directing their anger at him. And what they're going to get out of it is probably a sort of manufactured consent of, well, he's been reined in, and, you know, you have a victory now. You're going to get what you want. Get on the system, and we're going to help take care of you. I mean, that's really where it's headed in the long run.
They're bringing in, didn't you say they're bringing in a universal basic income type of thing in France next year?
Well, they're doing tests in certain regions. I think the southwest region of France, they're doing a test, and they're talking about bringing in nationally a universal basic income where everyone gets a certain minimum amount. Well, that's one way of dealing with people who can't meet their bills.
Exactly, but in order to bring that system in, they're going to do it with this digital chip card. They're not going to do it any other way. It'll come hand in hand with that. It's all going to come together as one system. Right before these protests broke out, President Macron launched the first ever Paris Peace Forum on the centennial of the end of World War I.
In the Paris Peace Forum, where a number of world leaders will be gathering. Now, the French president the German Chancellor as well as the Secretary General of the United Nations are going to be speaking there.
Which was co-partnered with the Rockefeller Foundation as an effort to, quote, preserve a peaceful world order. This was attended by all kinds of world leaders and people high up in governance.
One of the questions they want to raise is where has humanity gone wrong?
On the Rockefeller Foundation website, it specifically notes that as a partner to the forum, the Rockefeller Foundation will keep its eyes peeled for ideas that promote good governance through advances in science and technology, and then goes on to point out that wading into the digital state is specifically one of the Rockefeller Foundation's focus areas with this. And it mentions Estonia specifically as a prime example of this because all government services have been digitized in Estonia. It also goes on to mention the biometric digital ID system in India as another prime example. That very first peace forum, Macron just launched that, co-partnered by the Rockefeller Foundation, specifically focused on the digitizing of the state right before all of these protests kicked off. What are the odds?
And this is happening at a key time where Europe as a whole, where the EU is trying to restructure digitally, and they've already done this almost in completion in Estonia, but that's a little tiny country that frankly not that many people have even heard of, no one pays attention to. But France is a major country, one of the biggest key countries of Europe, and if they get it there, it'll just be a matter of toppling the dominoes elsewhere. And so at an EU level, they're really looking to deal with immigration and customs digitally and using biometrics, and then within nation states dealing with taxes and banking and transactions and parking tickets, all digitally on the same centralized card where they can track and trace people at an individualized level. And so there's a major effort underway to overhaul the EU and digitalize all the major interactions thereof. And that's what's going on in the larger picture.
And I've said this in the past, but it didn't mean what it means now, because I couldn't understand it even at the time when I said it the way that I can totally get it now. This is the New World Order one world system, this right here. And what I used to say was, the problem with a one world government and a global governance is if you don't like it, where are you gonna go? Most people aren't gonna get in their spaceship and go to Mars with Elon Musk, okay? So this is it though. They're not gonna have to make the whole world one actual global world. They're just gonna have to do it digitally. It'll be like the world is the EU. If we're all digital and we're all in this system and the system is integrated worldwide, there's your global governance. There's your one world system. There's your one world government. They've already got the UN in place with its over 300 agencies. So it's all waiting in the wings. The infrastructure's already been built. They're now just trying to implement it all. And that's part of what's going on right now. And France is key to that. And the same prime minister who took his first trip as being prime minister to go to Estonia and announce that France was getting on this system is the same prime minister who showed up to these protests and said he was going to meet with the protesters and try to talk about their demands and everything. The whole thing is being handled. That's the thing. No one wants to hear stuff like that. And they've taken these taxes away for 6 months, but you know this is coming back. And what sucks is there are real people in these protests who have real problems. We talked to one guy who said, you know, the problem is we only get paid in France once a month and people are not making it to the next month. They're not able to eat, you know?
There's a whole bunch of bread in the street.
And they just keep levying new taxes. Like this fuel tax is an environmental tax because they want to bring in renewable energy, but they want to do it on the backs of charging all the people for it.
Which is exactly what they've been doing in Estonia. And really the Estonian model is what the EU and the European Commission has been pushing at a continent-wide level over the past several years. And it's been going on right in the background of these protests. And while this is getting the headlines, that's what's being implemented. Want to hear that here's an example of people taking back their government and getting angry and showing how it's done. Well, they're about to get played.
So that's what's really going on.
Sorry if that's not what you want to hear.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
They're egging these people on purpose. Revolutions have been used in history to fundamentally change society. I'm not talking about organic movements that sprang up out of nowhere and it's true and it's real. I'm talking about following an order out of chaos model to bring about a fundamental transformation of society. It's what happened during the original French Revolution, and it's what they're trying to do in France and in Europe and the world today. It's order out of chaos.